Welcome to the OSHA Compliance Webinar, How to Master the Regulations Even If You Have No Experience. I'm glad you've come today because you will discover some interesting stuff here about OSHA compliance. Compliance is a process, and you're going to learn the 4 steps that are involved in complying with the OSHA regulations. You're going to learn about some obstacles that you have to overcome in order to make compliance happen at your facility. And you're going to learn how to eliminate the fear of compliance failure. So, who am I to be talking about OSHA compliance? Well, my name is Ron Harvey. I've been in the environmental service industry for 35 years now as a hazardous waste chemist. I've personally handled somewhere around 400,000 drums of hazardous waste. I've responded to hundreds of chemical releases and spills of every kind. I've cleaned up several hundred illegal drug labs. And yes, that is a picture of me mucking, as we call it. Some old paint needed to be dumped into drums, and that wasn't a very fun job. I'm doing this because I've been in thousands of businesses over my years of going out into these companies and picking up their waste and cleaning up their spills and talking to them about this and that, doing inventories, lots of different things. And every time I would go into these businesses, I would be walking through the facility and I would just be able to look around and I would see some were doing a good job at compliance, some were doing a bad job of compliance, and some were just plain ugly. It's no other real nice way to put that. And so I wanted to help. I've come to the conclusion over the years that disposing of people's waste is helpful, but really I can be of more help to clients in terms of just helping them with their compliance with the regulations. But I want to tell you a quick story first. One day, a few years ago, I got a dent in my door, long story. And so I brought it to a little local paint and body shop and I said, hey guys, I need you to fix this. The owner comes out, he looks at it, gives me a price. I said, okay, great, let's do it. And as we're walking back in, he said, so what do you do? And I said, well, I help companies deal with their OSHA, EPA, and DOT compliance. And the first words out of his mouth were this: the thing I fear the most is OSHA walking in that door. And I was absolutely floored by that. Of all the things for a small business owner to be concerned about, the thing he feared the most was OSHA. And I thought, damn, it doesn't need to be like that. And so I decided that day to do something about this. And that's what I've been working on. So I have a couple of questions for you. Are you responsible for OSHA compliance at your workplace? Is that what you do? And of course, do you have other primary responsibilities like production, operations, human resource management, whatever? Because that is a condition I see in many people, that they are juggling different responsibilities, and OSHA compliance just happens to be one of them. And in respect to your OSHA compliance, are you struggling with those responsibilities? I want you to ask yourself that. You got to be honest too. And hopefully, since you've come to this webinar, you have already come to the conclusion that, yeah, I got to get some things straight regarding OSHA. Now, I want to tell you what you really need to do in terms of the process that it takes to comply with the regulations. It's really not that difficult in certain respects and difficult in others. But the first thing you got to do is you need to recognize which activities at your facility are regulated. Just looking around and saying, okay, that looks good, everything's okay over there, you may not be actually picking up on the fact that a particular activity is regulated, and when it's regulated, therefore there are requirements. The next thing you have to do is to determine which regulations actually apply to that regulated activity. Because in order to know how to comply with a given regulation, you need to know where it is. I mean, what is it? What does it tell you to do? So that's the second step you need to do. The third step is to identify the legal requirements in that regulation. Easier said than done. That's all I'm going to say about that. And then, of course, once you know what needs to be done, you need to implement those requirements. And that's it. Those are the steps you need to take in order to be in compliance with the OSHA regulations. I want to go into a little more depth now on the 4 steps. Recognize your regulated activities. So you've got to be able to look at the different type of operations in your facility with the eye of a regulator. And you've got to be able to start recognizing what activities are regulated. Like if your people are doing any tank or vault entries, if they're set up to do emergency response, like for chemical spills and that kind of thing. If they do machinery maintenance, certain types of machinery maintenance are regulated by OSHA. You also have to consider what kind of chemicals are in the workplace. That's a big regulatory issue in terms of OSHA. Production processes, maintenance work, storage, transportation of hazardous materials and chemicals can invoke some different OSHA regulations. Also, what kind of equipment is in use? That's one of the big ones because in industry, everybody uses equipment. Forklifts in particular, a big issue. Hoists, slings, mechanical presses, even hand tools are regulated to some degree. And of course, you've got employee exposure to hazards, but it isn't just chemicals we're talking about. High noise levels are considered an exposure. Chemical exposure, obviously everybody knows about that. Working at heights is also considered an exposure to the risk of falling. And electrical hazards, well, everybody knows about getting shocked by electricity, and that is definitely an exposure for some of your employees. The second step, determine the applicable regulations. The first thing you got to do is look through the OSHA regulations. That's probably one of the most difficult parts here. Title 29 of the Code of Regulations, Part 1910, are the rules for general industry. And those are the OSHA regulations that apply to a vast number of industries in America. So that's where they are. So once you find the rule that applies to, say, forklifts, and by the way, they kind of hide it because they don't call forklifts forklifts. They call them powered industrial trucks. Pretty good bureaucrat speak there. So the next step is to check the applicability of a specific rule, because in some cases it might apply to you, in some cases it might not. And of course, if you see that it does apply, you can now look for exceptions to the rules. And of course, when it comes to the legal stuff, lots of exceptions are made. So that's the first thing you do. Look for applicability to your operations, and then look for exceptions to that rule. And of course, at that point, you're going to have to make the decision. Are you subject to that rule or not? That's the deciding point. Once you decide you're subject to a specific regulation, you're in. Now you got to deal with it. I wanted to mention also, specific operations might actually involve multiple regulations. And I got an example here. If you're welding on stainless steel at a height of 6 feet, you are subject to 3 different regulations simultaneously. So if you're looking at a particular operation and you see, oh, this is regulated here, don't necessarily quit there because there might be other regulations that apply at the same time. Next, oh gosh, we've got to identify the regulatory requirements. Fine, this is how you do it. You got to read the regulation. It's not easy because the regulations that are put out by the federal government and generally adopted by the state governments is written in a language that I call regulese. And if you have no experience with reading regulese from the Code of Federal Regulations, and they call it code for a reason, if you're not familiar with how to do that, you've got a little bit of a task on your hand. That's one of the things that is a primary difficulty for people that aren't very experienced when it comes to the regulations. Okay, let's say you figure out how to read the regulations. Now you need to identify the compliance points. What does the regulation tell you to do? Along that same line are equipment specifications, exposure levels for different hazards, like for instance the noise. If it's below a certain level, it's okay. If it's above a certain level, you're entering regulated territory. A lot of regulations require that you document inspections of equipment or operations. There's required signage for some regulations. Employee training, of course, a very great number of the regulations require your employees be trained in how to safely do a particular kind of work. And of course, just about all of them have some kind of record keeping that have to go along with it. So now that you know what the requirements are for a different regulation, you have to implement those requirements. Now, one of the first things you need to understand, of course, is that there's this thing called affected employees, and you need to find out who they are. For instance, with the forklifts, you can say that you don't have to train everybody in your facility how to drive a forklift. I mean, it's pretty obvious, but you need to determine which employees do drive the forklifts, and they have to be trained and equipped and so on because they are affected by the hazards associated with the use of the forklift. If there are exposures that your employees are subject to, you need to measure them somehow, or there's different ways to estimate them sometimes as well. Okay, implementation, training the employees. That's a real big one because, first off, when you train your employees, hopefully they understand better the hazards that they're dealing with and they're better able to protect themselves. And of course, one of the primary things that employees need are personal protective equipment, and it is required that the employer provide that equipment for them. One more thing here, ensure the employees follow the rules. That's actually quite frequently stated in the regulations that the employer must ensure that the employees actually do what you tell them to do. You need to ensure that the equipment meets specifications. You need to ensure that the inspections are documented, the training is documented. Lots of requirements when it comes to implementing the regulations. Okay, time for a quick quiz. Let's see how many of you guys can grasp this. I set it up as a quiz, but it's really just kind of a trick question. How many times do the OSHA general industry regulations use the term the employer shall or the employer must ensure? Now, those are the compliance requirements. Those are the compliance points that I mentioned earlier. When it says the employer shall, that means if you don't, you're in violation of the regulation. Or the employer must ensure, if you don't, you're in violation. So those are really important terms to pick up in the regulations. So, is it around 100 times that the general industry regulations use that term? Is it about 500 times? More than 1,000? In actuality, the OSHA regulations for general industry say the employer shall or the employer must ensure 1,527 times. Now, that is a lot of requirements for the employers. Keep that in mind. 1,527 times the regulations tell you this is what you got to do. And if you don't, it might not be good. Now that you've learned the step-by-step process that you can use to comply with the OSHA regulations, and those are, again, recognize your regulated activities, determine the applicable regulation, identify the regulatory requirements for that regulation, and implement the requirements. Those are the steps. Of course, sometimes there are things that get in the way. I put right at the top of that the language of the regulations. Like I said, regulese is not an easy language to understand. If you have little background or experience with OSHA regulations and safety and all that stuff, that can be a real difficulty for you. If you have other priorities, now that's another really huge thing because most of the people that are out there with OSHA responsibilities have other priorities as well, and there's quite a bit of competition between the two. On the fourth one here, you have no foundation or guidance. What I mean here is that you may have been put into the position of being the safety manager. And you say, okay, great, I'm the safety manager now. But there's nothing for you to build on. There's no established written programs. There's no training records. I mean, you might be handed a blank slate sometimes when it comes to your new responsibilities. And sometimes the person that was in charge of those is gone. In other words, you don't have anybody else that can kind of show you the ropes. So you're just kind of thrown out there and you don't have any help to turn to at all. So what can happen if you don't manage to get your compliance in order? You go ahead and you take some actions in terms of getting your facility into compliance, but you're really still not sure how to get it done. What I've seen frequently in different businesses is that they take the seat of the pants compliance method, which is basically just kind of status quo, everything's okay until everything hits the fan. Another problem that can crop up when it comes to compliance is it takes the back seat. Everybody just kind of says, all right, everything looks good, business as usual, let's get the job done. And compliance winds up just getting put farther and farther back on the bus, so to speak. Now, OSHA compliance enforcement is something that you need to be aware of. OSHA has a compliance budget, which is in the tens of millions of dollars a year that they spend enforcing the regulations. And there are two primary things that they use. There are national enforcement initiatives. Every year they have a new one. One year it was forklifts, the other year it was confined spaces. This particular year, if I remember correctly, fall protection is a big deal. So that is something that OSHA regulators are looking for. And they do the same on the state level, and they can actually have different enforcement focuses based on the different industries or industrial activities in that state. So OSHA is out there looking to enforce compliance. How do they do that? They conduct inspections. Now, employee complaints are a large percentage of the causes of inspections. In particular, if you go to OSHA's main page on their website, osha.gov, and you will see right on their front page a pretty prominent section that says, file a complaint here. So they're actually encouraging employees to file complaints. That is one of the doors that OSHA will use to come in and perform an inspection at your facility. Another thing I wanted to make you aware of is that OSHA fines back in 2016 were increased up to 80%. They hadn't increased their fines for a number of years, and a couple of years ago, they were given the green light to increase their fines significantly. And according to what I've seen, they have been using that new authorization. Soft targets. What do I mean by that? The OSHA inspectors, they pretty much know who's on top of the game, but they also know who is basically out of compliance, and they will target what I call these soft targets, because they come in and they know that they're going to find multiple violations at those facilities. It makes their job easy. I mean, come on, these are people, they don't want to have to dig and dig and dig and dig and dig to finally find something wrong at a particular facility. If they come in and they look at a couple of things and they say, okay, well, everything looks good here, see you later, they're going to go look for a soft target. Now, other things that will bring this trouble on: employee injuries. If you have serious injuries or even a fatality at your facility, you can pretty much expect OSHA to be paying attention to you in short order. These guys, by the way, I've talked to some of them. They read the newspapers. If they see a big story that night when they get home about a facility that had some chemical reaction or fire or whatever, and a whole bunch of employees wind up going to the hospital for exposure or something like that, they might be kind of dropping by and seeing what happened, of course. I mean, that's their job. And so employee injuries is a very significant cause of people coming in. Another thing to be aware of is EMR increases. EMR is your experience modification rate. It's used for calculating insurance rates. So when you have employees that get injured, your EMR goes up. Now, that increases what you pay for your insurance, but also I've seen several cases recently, and this is becoming more and more popular, where a vendor is kicked off of a contract because their EMR exceeds certain levels. In particular, there's an electrical utility company, and they had a company that provided them with a particular service. And they had an injury over the course of a year or two, and their EMR rate went up. And when the utility company got wind of that, they said, "You can't work for us anymore." I mean, they literally just kicked them out, said, "You can't work with us anymore until you get your EMR rate back down." That can be a really big deal, obviously. Personal injury lawsuits, well, yeah, we all know about that. That if an employee is hurt at work and they think that you are responsible as the employer, they could go out and find themselves a personal injury lawyer, and that can cause some problem as well. Now, if you have workers that get injured, another potential consequence of that is that your worker compensation costs and your rates will go up. And that can get pretty bad because the cost for workers' compensation is high enough already, and about the last thing you want is for it to go any higher. Now, I want to talk about how to beat the fear of compliance failure. When you fail to comply with the regulations, it causes all sorts of problems potentially. So, how do you deal with that? How can you overcome that failure? The first thing you got to do is you got to know the rules of the game. And the rules of the game are the regulations. You need to know what the regulations tell you to do. Another thing is that you need to know what your employees are up to, because they can find all sorts of creative ways to get stuff done, and sometimes that would lead to potential issues in terms of compliance. And of course, the best way to beat the fear of compliance failure is to know where to get help. If you don't have anybody at work that knows the regulations, and you're new at this and you're trying to get this figured out, you're going to need help because you got a pretty steep learning curve ahead of you. And without help, it's going to be a tough haul. Let me make this a little more real for you and show you how you can get the results that you need. For the past months, I've been doing nothing but working to perfect this process of compliance with the regulations. And the results have been nothing short of astounding. I've created a training course for you to help you overcome the burdens of OSHA compliance. It's called the Safety Manager's Facility Compliance Course. The Safety Manager's Facility Compliance Course is going to do a couple of things for you. It's going to remove that fear of compliance failure. It's going to give you confidence that even if the inspectors do show up, that you have done your job to make your workplace safer for your employees. And another thing it's going to be able to do is to make you look good to your boss, because chances are that when you've been put into that position, your boss kind of crossed his fingers and said, "Okay, I hope he can pull that off. I hope she can get this done for us." And they're putting some faith in you. And if you can bring your company into compliance with the OSHA regulations, you're going to look good. And that is something I want to see. The Safety Manager's Facility Compliance course is potentially going to save your company some money, because when you get the compliance issues nailed down, that tends to make the workplace more safe, less risky for your employees. Now, another thing is that when you get out there and you start implementing these safety measures, employee morale is generally going to increase, because they're going to see that the company actually cares, that they're going to fix something that has been dangling out there for years and everybody's complained about it, nothing ever got done, and you finally get out there and say, "Hey, this needs to be fixed because it's a compliance issue." Your employees are actually going to pick up on that at some point. Once you get this course under your belt, you're going to have knowledge that can be transferred to the next person that's going to be put in charge of safety at your facility. This isn't just going to evaporate when you leave, because all of the plans and the training and the records and the documents and the training materials are all going to be in place. And that is a real bonus to the owners and bosses in the company, because they're not going to have this seesaw effect of, oh, great, the old compliance person quit. Now what do? We start again? No. They're going to be able to take what you've built and be off to a good running start. It's also going to translate the regulations into plain English for you. This course is really all about simplifying the compliance process, because it's too complex. It doesn't need to be this hard. And you're also going to get supporting documents, compliance cheat sheets for each regulation that explain the applicability, the potential exceptions, and of course, if you're subject to the regulation, it's going to go ahead and just put everything right in place, check, check, check down the line. This is what you got to do. I've had the opportunity to send this course to someone I know. I'm going to have to call him Mr. X, because he's actually a sales manager for a company that sells online employee training. So he is well versed in this industry, and he knows good online training when he sees it. So I sent it to him, and he wrote back to me. This was unsolicited, and it really made me feel good, because it was quite exciting to read his thoughts. And this is what he said. I'm still going through it, but I really like it so far. It has a really personal touch, and it doesn't feel inorganic or impersonal. It sort of feels like you're in an actual classroom, and I enjoy your personal nuances throughout. I also think it's great that you have classes that are followed up by all of the support documentation that coincides with the training. I'm going through your walking and working surface class right now, and I just wanted to tell you that I think it's awesome so far. It is honestly mind-boggling that you've put this together all by yourself. You've done a great job. And I'll tell you what, that made me feel pretty good, because I've really focused on making this course productive for you. The Safety Manager's Facility Compliance course is an extensive curriculum that covers almost every general industry regulation under OSHA. At the regular retail price of $997, this course is a bargain, considering all the headaches and potential fines it will help you avoid. However, I'm going to do you one better. Just click the link in the chat box on the right of the screen to get your 50% savings. Once you sign up, you'll have instant access to the first 10 lessons. Then, every week, another lesson will be made available to you. This is done to prevent information overload. All the lessons are downloadable and are available in video, audio, and PowerPoint slides. Plus, you'll also get access to a private LinkedIn group where you can network with me and others. I will be there just about every day to answer any questions you may have about OSHA regulations at your facility, to share stories about regulatory changes, and to help you in any way I can in your compliance efforts. Your investment is covered by a 30-day, 100% risk-free guarantee. If for any reason over the next 30 days you aren't satisfied with this amazing course, we will refund your entire investment, no questions asked. Click the link in the chat box on the right of the screen and sign up now. You have nothing to lose and everything to gain. The course curriculum is broken up into 5 segments. The first one is an introduction to the course, which includes a whole lesson on how to read the Code of Federal Regulations. In this segment, I reduce the regulatory language to plain English. I show you how to find where it says that a particular regulation requires you to do A, B, and C. Then I lay out a clear path for exactly how to fulfill the requirements for A, B, and C, because this is how OSHA compliance is done. The second part of the course curriculum covers regulations that are universally applicable to almost every business in America. The way the course is set up, you can easily skip over any lesson or section that doesn't apply to you, so you're not wasting your time on anything that isn't relevant to your situation. The third section covers the most frequently cited regulations because this is exactly what OSHA will look for when they come to your facility. If you're in compliance with these, most often they'll say, "Thank you very much," and walk right back out the door. But if you mess up on one or more of these items, they're going to dig deeper to see what other violations they can find, and it could get very ugly. The fourth segment covers the most hazardous workplace operations. I wanted to focus on these specifically because you must make sure your employees are doing these things correctly. And finally, the fifth segment covers all the remaining OSHA regulations in order, one at a time, in plain English. Click the link in the chat box on the right of the screen right now to lock in your one-time price of just $497 for the entire course. Remember, you're covered by a 30-day risk-free guarantee, so you have nothing to lose and you have a lot to gain by signing up now. In summary, compliance with OSHA regulations can reduce business risk, compliance can keep you safe from the regulatory enforcers, and compliance can make your workplace safer for your employees. Don't wait until the crap hits the fan before you fix the problem. Sign up today and get your OSHA compliance under control so you can prevent problems before they happen. Click the link in the chat box on the right of the screen and sign up right now while you can still get the course at half price. This is Ron Harvey with Echelon Environmental, signing off. Thank you.